So it's, really getting to know you and your credibility and, what you've done in your professional career, young professional to now, that's allowed us to be confident when we say Alfredo Petrov is like a world-class mineralogist. One thing I want to say is I have a serious amount of respect for you because of how Stan speaks about you, which is something I learned recently is the important thing, right? Like the people around you, it's what they say about you, not what you think you say about yourself, not what anything, it's what the people around you are saying. And I have so much respect for him and what he's done for the geology community. When he starts talking about you, I really do believe that you have seen a lot of rock and you really do understand the physical world
Well, he knows how I think because we've crossed paths on the mineralogy data set.
When did that happen? So this is the conception part. Kind of when did this conversation start and this relationship start with you guys?
10 years ago.
Ah.
Did we first meet at the Inn Suites?
2011.
Yeah, we did. You were in 204.
You remember
but it was
the
a while until I found you in 204. Because I was down at I got to know Jaroslav a lot longer before I got to know you.
You're talking about a specific...
Me and Jaroslav are good buddies.
This is
go back into the Precambrian in Bolivia.
In Bolivia. This is talking where you sell minerals at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. That's what he's talking about with Room 204, right?
So yeah. I was selling Bolivian rocks, and he met me at the hotel. We were at the Inn Suites hotel show, which is now they keep changing the name of these hotels. I think it's the Tucson City Center Hotel.
Yeah, it is.
Is this like 3 stories and it's got a pool in the center?
Right.
Oh, man, that place is awesome.
All these dinosaurs that used to be parked around the place. But they've all disappeared.
You took us there in 2018.
That's right. One of the first places I took you.
I don't remember meeting Alfredo, though. I don't remember.
Well, because I had already moved to 2018, I think was the year I moved to La Fuente, right? I wasn't there anymore. Yeah.
Okay.
For some reason, but I took him to La Fuente, too.
So,
in fact, that was the first stop.
I thought maybe the relationship was longer than that. So take us back to, because Stan he's a world-class scientist. He's been around the world, all continents except for Australia.
The Inn Suites thing is, well, he's probably traveled more than I have.
Well, that's what I want to get into. So if Stan is the world expert hydrothermal geologist and has all the dynamic layered earth model, truly that, Stan, and you're Alfredo Petrov, and you guys only met 11 years ago, how did you become the mineralogist that caught Stan Keith's attention? That's what I'm really trying to...
I think it's because it's through his hobby rather than his profession, because Stan collects super rare species of minerals. He has minerals in his collection where the total supply on the planet is measured in milligrams rather than tons, literally milligrams.
Whoa.
So, of all the 5,000 and something mineral species known on this planet, there are probably only 600 out of the 5,000 that occur in macroscopic sizes. The majority of these minerals are extremely small, microscopic things available in tiny quantities, and only the most fanatic enthusiasts of mineralogy desire to own one or actually have one. And Stan has acquired many of those things. Yeah.
Whoa, I had no idea about those facts.
So
I knew the 5,000. I mean, I kind of have a general idea of rocks and minerals.
4,500 of those.
Right. I knew you were in probably the top 10 percentile of all humans on the planet with your collection.
Well, you have to ask him.
Well, he's probably in the top 1 percentile of all mineral collectors in the number of different species he has. There are probably no more than a dozen people on the planet, literally, that have as many species as Stan does.
The one Russian is Kosaki guy.
Yeah, his big enemy.
Have you seen
yeah, he's here with his wife. He left the kids in Russia, but
you think it's possible to get your enemy here tomorrow?
He's
maybe
not my enemy.
It's a friendly but intense competition.
Oh my gosh, I have to meet this man. That's amazing. I did not know these statistics
Well, see,
at all.
I'm very envious because he's got a mineral named after him. In fact, this guy has a mineral named after him.
What?
Well, there'll be a Stanley Keithite eventually.
Well, he's gonna have to politic for it. Or
What's the name of the mineral you've discovered?
Well, they named
He
it
didn't.
Alfredo Petrovite. You can never name a mineral after yourself. That's prohibited in mineralogy. So in other sciences like botany or, for example, in botany, I have a friend who collects orchids. And out in the Amazon jungle, he's already discovered 4 new species and 1 new genus of orchids. And they're all named after him or his family members. That's pretty much automatic in botany or biology, that the finder of a new species gets it named after them. And the same thing in astronomy with comets. If you're an amateur astronomer and you find a comet or an asteroid, you pretty much have the right to decide what it's going to be named, and they'll generally, other astronomers will name it after you. But in mineralogy, it doesn't work that way. Lots of collectors find a mineral species, a new one, but they never have a species named after them, because an amateur mineralogist or an amateur field collector is not capable of doing all the X-ray work and crystal structure work that's necessary to determine whether that is really a new species or not. And the guy who does that work and publishes it is the one who gets to decide what the species name is going to be.
Whoa.
And they very frequently don't name it after the person who found it. So it works differently in mineralogy.
He's got to be real good friends with Tony Kampf.
Who's Tony Kampf? I recognize that name for some reason.
He's a
I'm friends with a lot of mineralogists, not only Tony Kampf, but Tony Kampf is a mineralogist at the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History.
But he's friends with guys that name minerals.
And
Gotcha.
That sounds like corruption. Edit that part out. Well, there are 2. The guy who, back in the 1980s, the guy who had named more minerals than any other scientist on Earth was Dr. Pete Dunn.
Is he still around?
He just died recently, a couple of years ago. Yeah,
wow.
He died a couple of years ago. But he was a mineralogist at the Smithsonian Museum.
Wow.
And he had described the crystal structure and the new species and given the names to them of more mineral species than any other mineralogist before him.
Wow.
Over 100, I think.
However, he's got competition.
Well, he got, long before he retired, he suddenly gave it up and he didn't do it anymore. And a lot of those minerals he described, only 1 specimen existed. 1 specimen was found, it was described as a new species, given a name, and no other was ever found. So sometimes they were tiny little bits of crystals that no one ever found another one. It was a unique specimen.
Whoa.
And I ran into him one day at the Franklin, New Jersey, at the old zinc mines. They have a mineral show, and I ran into Dr. Pete Dunn there from the Smithsonian. And somebody introduced me, and I said, Dr. Dunn, it's an honor to meet you. And I've been following over the years your published descriptions of new minerals, but I noticed that over the last 10 years, there haven't been any. I said, have you stopped doing that kind of work? And he looked at me a bit angrily. And I am now going to quote his exact words.
Oh, man.
His exact words were, "Those fucking little freaks of nature, I don't do that anymore."
Oh.
Fucking little freaks of nature. I don't know what, I mean, obviously something.
That's me. He's probably talking about me.
Something in the mineral description world must have really pissed him off or depressed him, and he just stopped describing new species.
Wow.
And after he stopped doing that, there was a Russian guy, Petrov, yes, Igor Petrov became the man who kept churning them out really fast, new mineral species descriptions.
He's still grinding them out.
He's still grinding them out, you're right. But I think he has been, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think he has been overtaken now.
I think he's overtaken Dunn.
Yeah. Oh, he's definitely overtaken Dunn, but I think he has been overtaken now by Tony Kampf.
Really?
What?
I think Tony Kampf at LA County Museum is
the race of mineralogy names.
Yeah.
There is a friendly little competition, although none of them will admit to it.
Wow. Isn't that interesting? Stan gets kind of enlightened and introduced to the geology world and the physical world through this kind of a cool story about him, making trails and forts with his brother on the side of a hill in Pasadena, and bang, all of a sudden these rocks are pouring over the side of a cliff, and then the guy who's doing it is dropping little gems and rocks because he knows Stan is down there with his friends, and bang, that man, had a major impact.
Trails is what they want.
How old were you when that happened?
About 7 or 8.
Oh, you were just a little kid.
So what about you? How the heck did you? How does your level of affection and affinity, I guess you'd say, just to the natural world, where did that come from?
Well, I grew up on a farm. My father was a farmer in England. So when I was a little boy, I lived in England. And my mother, of course, I don't remember this, but my mother says I've been bringing dirty rocks into the house ever since I was 2 years old. And my mom would take them out again and throw them away because they were muddy. And me and my mom would get into quarrels about how many rocks were allowed in the house ever since I was 2 years old. But of course, I have no memory of that. My own memories of collecting minerals start when I was about 11 years old. And I had gone into a used bookshop in England, and there were some old mineral books for sale, and I spent my pocket money buying
Dana's Mineralogy.
Dana's Mineralogy was the
That's
first
what I
one.
did. That was the first one I
And
bought.
then the British version of Fred Poe's Field Guide to Collecting Minerals. The British version was a little bit different than the American one.
What year was this?
So that was in late 60s.
Wow. Late 60s England. You walk into a used bookstore and you find.
No, I was about 10 years ahead of him. I did that. Got my first Dana in 58.
No, it was a wonderful book.
Whoa.
Book.
I still have it.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm not.
All right, but you can't just, all right, so if you grow up in the high desert, right, and it's all flat plains, and you find that book, you probably don't get really excited as a kid in the high desert looking at sandstone all over the place.
Where were you, in London?
Well, no, not very far away from London. I was in a farm in southern England.
Outcrops all over the place?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It was flat farmland, soil. The only rocks you would find out in the field was a flint nodule once in a while.
Flint nodule.
We're down in the Cretaceous, right?
Yeah. But there was a clay pit. A brick company had a clay pit within walking distance of our farm.
Aha.
And as a kid, we weren't supposed to play there, but we would go and play there anyway and sneak in when nobody was working. And out of the clay would come sometimes little pyrite nodules, little doubly terminated transparent gypsum crystals.
Wow.
So those were kind of exciting for a young boy. But what really set me off collecting was 2 years later, when I was 13 years old, my parents moved to Ethiopia. And so then I went with them, and I went to high school in Ethiopia. I was the only white kid in a high school of 800 Ethiopians.
Oh my gosh.
And we were in an active volcanic area in the East African Rift Valley. Mm-hmm. And one of the fault line caves of the Rift Valley, where the earth was being pulled apart and a gap was forming under the ground, was this fault line cave a couple miles long. Imagine a cave in volcanic rock that's absolutely straight.
What?
And so I got into that when I was a teenage boy. That was quite exciting.
Whoa.
And there were active hot springs and fumaroles and salt
Man, I'm
lakes
so clueless
and
and uncultured in that sense. Like thinking of Ethiopia, I have a good friend from Eritrea, and he talks about the mountains. And so I'm going, whoa, there's mountains. I have no clue. I really have no clue on the geography.
And the climate was very similar to here. I mean, it's in the tropics, but we were about 6,000 or 7,000 feet above sea level where we were, and it was semi-arid. And I would guess that the scenery and the climate was probably very similar here to Sonoita in Ethiopia. It was high plains.
For some reason, he likes high plains.
Yeah.
I do too. I mean, you're on the top of the world, basically. You're at the top of the crust.
Well,
Near it.
Fun fact, Africa is the highest average elevation continent on the planet.
Right. And that ties to the African
And
super
Ethiopia is higher than most.
Yeah.
Wow. Unbelievable. I just love it. I want to talk about your stuff. I was telling Stan, I said, we should probably prepare to talk till like 1 or 2 in the morning. But he said, we got to eat dinner. And
What was also great about my high school there in Ethiopia, the high school actually had a chemistry lab with lots of chemicals. And we were allowed to go in there after school in our free time and play with the chemicals.
Whoa.
And it was a lot of things that you would not be allowed to do in the United States or in England. Professors would get into trouble if they just let the children come in after school and play with the acids.
Right.
But
I mean, there's something to that.
And when they found out I was interested in stones, and I was the only one interested in stones, the chemistry professor took an interest in me, and he said, do you want me to show you how to analyze a stone for phosphate content? So when I was about 14...
now he got more into that than I did.
Okay.
When I was about 14 years old, I got to grind a stone in a mortar and pestle and dissolve it in nitric acid and check it with ammonium molybdate to see if there was any phosphate in it. And so that got me ever more interested in the chemistry of minerals.
And chemistry in general.
Wow.
That was when I decided that I wanted to study something to do with rocks.
So how does your career go? You get educated, you get degrees in geology and mineralogy?
Yes,
okay.
Geology.
And then you go into a young professional career. What did you do for most of your career?
My career was very atypical, so I would not recommend any young person to follow it. It was very disjointed and chaotic, and I graduated in the 1980s. The U.S. was in a recession when I graduated. There were no good jobs available. I had thousands of dollars in student debt hanging over my head. And
where did you go to school?
San Diego State.
Oh, that's right.
SDSU?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's where I got my field camp done with Dr. Dr. Gertie. I love that rings a bell.
No, you wouldn't.
Or one of the main AAPG guys is out of SDSU. It ties into Dr. Dickinson.
I remember Dr. Threet, who has since died many years ago, but Dr. Threet was one of my professors.
You went to school, you got your undergraduate and master's degree at SDSU?
No, just undergraduate. And Dr. Threet was one of the last professors who did not believe in plate tectonics. He was the last holdout. He was constantly looking for alternative explanations.
What?
Or sometimes I thought he was just pretending to, because he wanted to force us to think and be able to back up our thoughts with logical conclusions. The head of the department in those days was Peterson. Anyway, after I graduated, I had a lot of student loan debts and no job. And I had a brother-in-law who was working, one of my brother-in-laws was a graduate student at the University of Nagoya in Japan.
Wow.
And he called me up one day and said, I heard you're having a hard time finding a good job. He said, would you consider coming to the University of Nagoya? We pay $70 an hour. You'll be working by the hour. And in the 1980s, $70 an hour.
That's a serious stipend.
It sounded like a wonderful income to me. Never earned anything like that before that.
Oh, okay.
And he said, what we need is somebody to edit research papers. because he said, we Japanese scientists all dream about publishing in international journals in English, but their English is so bad that the words are all English, but nobody can understand what they want to say. So their papers are typically rejected, and they come back with a rejection slip because the English isn't understandable. So then these Japanese researchers, they take it over to the English department at the university, and they find some professor who has studied Shakespeare all his life and ask him to fix their research paper.
Geology paper.
And the guys, yes.
A little bit of a disconnect.
As you can imagine, the English literature professor screws it up even worse than it was before because he doesn't understand what the paper was trying to say. And then it gets rejected a second time. So he said, we are really looking for somebody who can edit research papers and who understands the format that a research paper is supposed to look like. So I said, great, this sounds like a great opportunity. So I pack my suitcase and fly off to Japan, sight unseen, without having ever seen the country before. I land there. My introduction to Japanese society was leaving the airport and looking for a train to go to the university. I'm standing on the station platform. A lot of other people standing there. It's crowded, and there's this very serious sounding announcement in Japanese over the loudspeaker, which of course I don't understand. I learned Japanese.
You feel the intensity.
Yes,
though.
now I would understand it, but at that time I didn't understand Japanese. And so I asked a businessman with a suit and a tie and a briefcase who looks like he might know English. I said, excuse me, what was that announcement about? Luckily, the guy did. He said, oh, the station master is apologizing because the train will come 1 minute late. And I thought, surely he means I had come from countries where the train is always 10 or 15 minutes late. It's never, ever on time.
Wow.
And,
wow.
So I said, surely that can't be correct. They must mean it's going to be an hour late or something. But no, it really was 1 minute late. And later on, I found out that was a really rare event. That doesn't happen very often, that they have to humbly apologize for the train being a minute late.
Oh my gosh, the precision of the Japanese culture.
Precision. The average lateness of a subway train in New York is 6 minutes. The average lateness of the superfast bullet trains in Japan is 6 seconds. And so that was a really unique day, that they were a whole minute late, and that was the first day I arrived. That was my introduction to Japanese culture.
You were the anomaly that just showed up in Japan.
And when I arrived at the university, I found that they didn't only expect me to correct geology papers, they also expected me to correct papers in electrical engineering and molecular biology and virology and everything. I got to read all the latest medical research before it was published. It was a very strange. In the beginning, I was a little bit nervous, but later on, I figured out how to do it. Wow. This is in pre-email days. The internet didn't exist yet. So the tools of my trade were a red pen and a bottle of aspirin. And I would go to, usually we would start out sitting in this professor's office across the table, and I would read a sentence to him on his paper and say, what the hell does this mean? The words are English, but it is totally non-understandable. And he would have to explain to me. So while I was doing this job, it would take hours to go through the whole paper. Halfway through, he would say, I'm thirsty, let's go to a bar. And so we would go off to the bar and continue working until midnight on this paper.
Wow.
Sometimes I would be in bed already, and it would be midnight, and the phone would ring, and some desperate professor would say, Alfredo, I have to go to the airport at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm flying to this conference in Vienna, and my paper isn't ready yet. Can you come meet me at the bar and help me finish it?
Wow.
So I would get up, dress up,
Dick.
take a taxi to the bar, and we would be like from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the morning working on this guy's paper, and then he would say thank you very much and rush off to the airport with his paper under his arm to present it at some international conference.
Wow.
I did this for 4 years. I worked 7 days a week. There was
Oh, my.
endless amounts of work. I ended up doing it.
You made a lot of money.
Oh, I made a lot of money, yes. I did it at 3 different universities. And I ended up having, there was nobody else doing it. I ended up working 7 days a week, day and night.
Alfredo,
And,
wow. Did you keep track of all the papers you helped communicate from the author to the rest of the world?
No, I never could. There were way too many. I kept a copy.
There has to be something major that was published through that time.
Well, there was one article on viruses causing breast cancer in women.
What?
Yes, and this was like totally out of my field, but I helped the guy correct his English, and he got a letter from the international journal that the paper was published in saying, "We congratulate you," because he said, "This is the first time we have ever gotten a paper from Japan that was written in perfect English." And so, of course, it was. So he called me and said, "Alfredo, look at this letter I got from the journal."
Gosh, dang. How long did you do that for? 4 years? And then,
4 years,
and then you
yes.
picked up something else.
After 4 years, I was so stressed out from this overwork.
Pockets full of money.
Yeah. So I decided to basically, I was in my late 30s by that time, but I decided to retire.
Wow.
And I wanted to retire in a country that was cheap and had a nice climate and lots of minerals, because that was my hobby, going out collecting minerals. And so I decided on Bolivia.
Wow.
So in my late 30s, I moved to Bolivia with the intention of retiring. That didn't work out very well.
You still had some piss and vinegar in you.
Yes, so I went out there, I bought a home and started collecting minerals.
And what was the approximate year of that?
That was in 89.
1989.
What were you doing in 89?
Oh, my God.
MagmaChem's up and running. You definitely have a project going.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was doing a lot of Nevada stuff at that point.
Looking for gold, copper, anything.
Yeah, big time Nevada stuff.
So my intention was to retire there and spend my life doing my hobbies, gardening, growing cacti, collecting minerals on old mine dumps. But it didn't last very long, because when the Bolivians found out there was a guy who knew something about rare minerals there, I was constantly, the social circle started inevitably growing bigger and bigger, and one guy would introduce me to another guy, and I started meeting mine owners and prospectors and mine owners who were running small mines and needed help figuring out what minerals they had. And wow. I started finding, the level of Bolivia is a big mining country, has been for hundreds of years. A big chunk of their economy depends on mining.
Iron and precious metals.
Tin, silver, gold, bismuth. They were the world's, at various times in history, they've been the world's biggest producer of silver, and then tin, and then bismuth and antimony, all kinds of rare metals. There were literally, as we speak, there must be at least 1,000 mines operating in Bolivia still, at least.
Oh my gosh. And Bolivia is the size of?
Texas and California combined, roughly.
Wow.
In land area.
It's a big effing country.
Yeah.
And mostly empty, because it's got the population of 10 million people in a country that's considerably bigger than Texas. Yes, it's mostly
most
empty.
of those are in just a couple of towns, like La Paz.
Yeah, most of the people are in like 5 or 6 cities.
Oh my gosh, that country's empty.
Oh, it is. It's pretty empty.
Lots of alpacas.
Yeah.
Lots of alpacas. Wow, so you're in 89, you're in Bolivia.
So I'm meeting all these guys who want help identifying their minerals. Bolivia has several universities. In fact, the university in Potosi is the oldest university in the Western Hemisphere. The Spanish opened a university there in the 1500s, long before. I mean, it's a pretty primitive backwater country now compared to the United States, but 500 years ago, there were universities in Bolivia when there was no university existing in the United States back then.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was a time when it was considered a fairly advanced country for its time.
Wow.
But nowadays, there are still universities in Bolivia, but there is no mineralogy department at any of those universities. There are mine engineering departments because there's a lot of mining. There's no mineralogy department. There is not a single professional mineralogist in the entire country.
Wow.
So I started getting requests for identifying things, and people were bringing weird stuff to my home all the time. Knocking on the door. And,
Stan would love that.
Yeah, you know.
I don't know about that.
Well, if you had like a Dropbox like Blockbuster back in the day, you just got to look at what people drop by. You don't want to interact so much. But anyway, so this is an unbelievable story. I mean, I'm getting so much from listening to your experience because it correlates to what's the problem in my generation.
You guys want another beer?
Yeah, heck yeah.
I still have one. If I'm allowed to drink on camera.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that you're
You can
encouraged.
ed-
You're
you can edit it
encouraged to
out.
do it.
Yeah, there you go. You can grab another one of these.
Yeah, I mean, this is so Arizona, you know, prickly pear.
It's not a bad beer, actually.
Prickly pear in the beer.
Where I was going with that while Stan grabs some new cold ones was I started realizing in the oil and gas industry that I'm still a part of. A big part of my life is still communicating, certainly the new science, MagmaChem, to the community and saying, hey, there's a whole new way of thinking about how these reservoirs put themselves together, which means there's a whole new way of producing these things. And it's very exciting, very cutting edge. But in my experience of being a geoscientist in the industry, I understand what you're saying when there's a lot of engineers, but there's not a lot of people that are actually telling me what's the elemental makeup of all this stuff. What's the mineralogy of this rock? It's really just now starting to come out that XRF, XRD, rock eval paralysis, this ability to see the elemental makeup of the rock and actually make more distinctions than just simply sand, shell, and carbonates or dolomites. We're barely getting there. You started this, and the mining industry started realizing this in the 80s, the 90s. They were going, what is this made out of? They're asking you those details without an XRF, without an XRD. You were doing this because of your experience. You kind of how did you figure out what you were looking at?
Well, I had basic chemicals at home for doing wet chemical tests, and I had a binocular microscope and a petrographic microscope.
Wow.
And ultraviolet lights for checking fluorescence. And every once in a while, I would run across stuff that there was no way to do what it was and without X-ray. But of course, I had plenty of friends back in the US with access to X-ray diffraction, and so I could just take grains to mail back to friends here in the States.
In an envelope.
In an envelope, and find out what they were.
That's awesome.
I started being sort of the mineral identifier for Bolivian miners. And it was only years later that I found out that there was actually a market for minerals. An American fellow by the name of Rock Courier, that was his real name, given name.
ROCK.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
He was one of the biggest mineral dealers in the world, selling specimens for collectors, museums, researchers.
High-end stuff.
Medicine, all those kind of things. So he came to visit me in Bolivia once, and he saw that my home and my garage were full of rocks. And he said, Alfredo, you don't need this many rocks. What are you doing with so many? I said, well, I just can't bear to throw them away. And I trade with friends. I give them away to people. There's just too many. And he said, well, why don't you bring some to the Tucson show and sell them? And I said, what's the Tucson show?
Wow. What year's this?
This is 93.
Wow.
93.
Is this Rock Courier?
Rock Courier,
Yeah.
yes.
Rock Courier.
So Rock Courier visits me in Bolivia, and he sees a house and the garage and the garden full of rocks. I had no knowledge until then, no inkling that there was a commercial side to mineral collecting. I had been collecting minerals ever since I was a child, but I did not know until 93 that there were people who bought and sold these things. Until this big American dealer I mean, there are now I found
Emphasis
out there
on
are
big.
hundreds of mineral dealers in the United States, and this guy was a big dealer in every sense of the word.
Rock Courier.
Yes, he had a big
Legend.
business with 11 employees, went all over the
It's the
world
guy that-
looking for minerals to buy. And he was also a big guy, literally. He was bigger than Stan.
No,
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
you're 6'5" and a half,
Yeah, well,
300 pounds.
Well, that's about what Rock was, but he was more
But
than
he was
Stan.
like 6.
Yeah.
600
Six.
pounds.
I don't think he was that heavy.
No,
but
he was 400 anyway.
He was bigger than you.
Whoa. We got to get your take on Rock Courier right after his story of Rock
So
Courier.
his first trip
Wow.
to Bolivia,
His
Rock's
takes
first
on priceless.
trip to visit me in Bolivia, we had corresponded for a while before he came to visit me. So I knew this man only through letters. And email was just barely getting started around that time in the early 90s. So my first correspondence was Rock with the old-fashioned way, was pen on paper and a stamp on an envelope.
Wow.
And we'd written back and forth to each other about various mineral topics before he came to actually visit me in Bolivia. He said, I travel to South America on business several times a year, he said, and Peru and Brazil mostly. He said, can I stop over and visit you? I said, sure. So I said, I'll pick you up at the airport. You can stay at my house. So I went to the airport to pick him up in a very beat-up VW Beetle. This VW Beetle was treated like a four-wheel drive car, even though it wasn't. It had spent years bouncing over rocks on old mine dumps, and it was really beat up. And I had no idea. I only knew this man from his letters. I had no idea how big he was.
He's
And,
the size of the fucking VW. He's the size of the
So,
How the hell did he get out of this thing?
so Rock Courier, after his visit to me, he came back home, and the biggest, most important mineral collectors magazine in the world is probably it's called the Mineralogical Record. And by coincidence, it's published right here in Tucson. And does Troy know the Mineralogical Record?
No.
Yeah. Well,
I have every one of them at the house.
yeah, it's published in Tucson, and it's known by mineral collectors all over the whole planet. Well, when Rock got back to the States from his visit to Bolivia, he wrote an article about his trip to Bolivia for the Mineralogical Record, and I remember word for word every painful word of the opening sentence. He said something like, Alfredo Petrov picked me up at the airport in a car, which added a whole new dimension to the meaning of the word dilapidated.
I mean, you're a big guy too, a VW bug. Now you got hit. Did you guys drive away in that thing? And
Yes, we did.
wow.
We had
That must
trouble
have
with his
been amazing to
His
watch.
suitcases were almost as big as him. I think we had to find rope and tie them into a
Quick
pile on the
weather
roof.
report. That's going to get interesting in about 5 minutes, I don't think.
Is that right? What do you mean, sunset? Should we pause for a sunset watch with Alfredo
just take
Petrov?
a quick look outside.
Cool. You said 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, we can do that. Okay, so you wrap this up. So you have 5 minutes right when you're done with your story, your take of Rock Courier and how you even knew about him, your first interaction with the guy, and then we'll go watch the sunset.
I don't really have that many stories about him.
How did you even know
You
about
knew
him?
each other.
Oh, I knew him before he knew him. Back
How?
In 1966, when I was
What?
growing up in Southern California.
What? How old's this
He
guy?
and I were both members of the Mineralogical Society of Southern California. I was a junior, and then he was an up-and-coming dignitary in MSSC, as we called it.
He's a little older than you.
Yeah, a little bit.
Whoa.
By about 5
Rock
years, I guess.
would have been
He
80
was 75,
Oh.
died at 75 in 2015, so that's
80 now.
Yeah, so he was 10 years older.
A little less.
A
Wow.
little less, yeah. So but I just knew him as on trips to Boron and things like that. He would go on MSSC.
What was his presence like? This guy, Rock Courier. He sounds like a true legend, like a man that's just.
Well,
out of-
just his size made him a legend. And he was extremely bigger than life, literally, and bigger than any mineral. I mean, he was this big guy, and you just couldn't get You know, and my mentor actually did more business with him than I ever did, Royal Marshall. So I have several of Rock's really early minerals.
What kind of guy was he, this Rock guy? Was he easy to
Gruff. My first word would be gruff.
He's a bit gruff.
But he was also very generous.
But once you got through the smoke screen, he was an incredibly nice guy.
He did more than any other human being to internationalize the mineral specimen business. Because Tucson has had the world's largest gem and mineral show for, what would you say, 60 years maybe, Stan?
Yeah, it started in the mid-50s.
Yeah. So Tucson is the world's biggest international market for mineral and gem specimens. People come every year from all over the world to buy and sell their rocks in Tucson.
Right.
And Rock probably did more in the 70s and 80s to internationalize the business than anyone else ever did, because when Tucson started in the 1950s, it was American dealers coming to buy and sell their rocks. And you'd have a handful of guys coming across the border from Mexico with some Mexican rocks to sell. And you may have had one or two snowbirds from Canada who spent the winter down here anyway. And that was it. So it was basically a North American mineral show.
Wow.
There were a few guys who traveled all over the world looking for specimens in Africa and South America and so on, and bringing them to Tucson to sell. But they would keep their sources secret. They had no interest in teaching those Africans or Brazilians or so how to come to Tucson to sell their rocks.
Wow.
Whereas Rock was the opposite. Rock would travel to foreign countries. He would meet somebody who had nice rocks, and he would tell them, why don't you bring these to Tucson? That's a great place to sell them. And he would help them do that. He would bring them to Tucson, introduce them to everybody, help them become independent mineral dealers in the United States. Rock brought South Africans, Peruvians, Indians, Brazilians.
Wow.
He brought them all over here, taught them, mentored them in how to get into the international mineral business. And now you find people from all over the world coming every year to Tucson to sell their rocks.
I say it's every rock in the world all in one place for about a month and a half, 2 months.
But we owe that pretty much to Rock Courier. He was the first one who actually tried to get the foreign dealers to come here. Like I said, the guys before Rock, they didn't want the foreign dealers to come here. They wanted to buy the rocks cheap in Brazil or wherever, bring them here and sell them for 100 times the price.
Right.
They wanted to get a rock in an African mine by trading it for a beer and then coming to the U.S. to sell it for $100. They didn't want the African coming here to sell the rock himself. Yeah.
Wow.
Rock was the one who started that policy.
At this point, do we know why?
Including me. He got me to come from Bolivia. When he saw all these rocks in my house, he said, Alfredo, you've got to bring these to Tucson and sell them at the Tucson show. I said, what's the Tucson show? He said, you've never heard of the Tucson show? I said, no, I haven't. Why would I have heard of it?
Did you tell him about your shoebox of Danberites?
No, well, that's the next thing. If he has time to listen to
I got
these
all
endless
night.
anecdotes.
Well, we got to eat at some point.
He said, Rock said, next February, you're coming to Tucson as my guest.
Oh my gosh. What year? 93, 94?
That was 93, yes. Wow. He said, you've got to come to Tucson. And he said, the first year you come, you'll be my guest. You'll stay with me. And so I came up.
You'd already met Jaroslav by then?
No. I met Yaroslav at, had I met Yaroslav or not?
Well, when did you buy that old miner's collection, mining engineer?
Well, that must have been 94 then, because I met Yaroslav also by mail, the same as Rock Courier. Well, that's a different story. Let me finish the Rock story first.
Yeah.
So,
you have all kinds of Harsel stories.
Rock said I should come to Tucson and bring some rocks to sell and stay as his guest. So I had found a locality in Bolivia in the jungle for Danberite crystals, a place that no one else knew. A little doubly terminated Danberite crystal, small things.
Bastards.
I fit 900 of those crystals into a shoebox. And I came with that shoebox of Danberite crystals to Tucson. And I thought, this was wonderful. This is great. I had so much fun in Tucson, meeting people from all over the world, selling my rocks and actually getting money for them, seeing all the other rocks that everybody else had, weird things I'd never heard of before, making lots of friends, because most of the people in the mineral business are pretty friendly. It was great fun. So basically, I decided to be a mineral dealer. Then Rock was the one who dragged me into this totally new world.
Wow. How's the sunset? Are we taking a break? Is it
So
break worthy? It's not break worthy. Okay.
It might crash out on us. I don't know.
Jaroslav Herschel is a mineral. He was a professor of mineralogy at the University in Prague in the Czech Republic. And in the Czech Republic, during when communism collapsed, that was around 1990, Eastern Europe, all the communist government collapsed and the Berlin Wall came down. And the countries basically had no money. For a few years after the Berlin Wall came down, and they stopped getting all their subsidies from the Soviet Union, all the Eastern European countries like Czech Republic and Poland and so on became very poor. A professor of mineralogy at the university in Prague in those days was getting a salary of $400 a month. Wow. And it was not enough to live on. So basically everybody was looking for moonlight jobs that they could do to bring extra money in. All the university professors had little businesses running on the side. Wow. They were either hiring themselves out as consultants to mining companies, or they were coming to Western mineral shows to sell specimens. And that's what Jaroslav Herschel started doing. He was a mineralogist at the university, a professor, so everybody trusted him, that the minerals he was selling were correctly identified. He had access to his own X-ray laboratories and things. Wow. And that's a big problem in the rare species business. If you're not just selling colorful rocks for the public like amethyst and agates, a big problem in the business is rocks floating around in the market that are not properly identified. Wow. And people put names on them.
That's why I put a lot of stock. I have a lot of Yaroslav's minerals in my rare mineral boxes up there.
Because you knew this was true. He was true to them.
I have a lot of confidence that they are what they are.
So
because he's made sure of that.
Yeah, so he actually knew Jaroslav in person before I did.
Yeah.
But there's a mineralogist by the name of Vandal King in upstate New York, and he likes to joke when he sees the dealers selling these rare minerals. He says, "Some of those rare species are so rare that they're only on the label, not on the specimen."
That's right.
And there's some truth to that. There's a lot of scammy, mislabeled rare minerals going around on the market.
Vandal, not Van, right?
Well, his real name is Vandal, but everybody calls him Van.
Is that V-A-N-D-A-L?
A-L, yes.
Okay.
Well, it's just remarkable that the science of geology and mineralogy is so young. When I'm talking to you, and you're talking about rock carrier, you're talking about the guy's figuring it out and really traveling the world and pulling the rocks together and actually saying, no, this is not a bullshit rock. This is actually the truthful, rare specimen that we're talking about. And then on top of that, you're saying there's 5,000-ish minerals and only 600-ish are like hand specimens.
Pushing 5,500.
The rest of them are trapped in some rock. And you got to find that rock. You got to find that deposit. To me, the science and the business of mineralogy and geology is so exciting. It's so under-discovered. We got to, how much fun would it be? The whole planet should be looking down at their feet, looking for rocks and specimens and becoming a part of the natural.
They should be looking that way rather than at their cell phones.
Well, if you go to the Tucson Mineral Show here every year is a great place to see how little explored the planet is from a mineral point of view. Because you walk around the show and look at all these wonderful minerals for sale, you realize that almost 90% of the minerals at the show are coming from a dozen countries on the world. Wow. And there are large numbers of countries you look at a geological map, you can see this country is not boring. This country has a complex geology. Yeah. There must be interesting minerals here. And yet there is nothing at the show from those countries.
Wow.
Like
how?
Mongolia, for example.
Yeah, when you walk around the show, you will see nothing from Cambodia or Suriname or Ecuador or Guyana or Panama or Eritrea. Absolutely nothing. And you wonder, these, well, very rarely you'll see a specimen from there. Yeah. So opal from Ethiopia, Eritrea, nothing.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
Watch myself around this guy.
That's right.
So, it makes you think, why isn't there anything coming from these countries?
Yeah.
It's just because nobody's looking.
That's right.
They're from the mineral specimen point of view, they're white patches on the world map. The world,
wow.
As interconnected as we are now, there are still large parts of the world that mineralogists and mineral specimen people have not explored yet.
Wow.
One of the minerals that I got interested in, basically because of meeting Stan, was the pyrobitumen and thraxolite, or whatever you prefer to call it.
Right.
And
well, that's actually that's an important distinction because they're not the same.
Thraxolite and
not the same. In that case, we
pyrobitumen.
have to correct the entry I put on Mindet because.
No, thraxolite is actually a kerogen. So it's actually pre-oil.
HC or H.5C.
Analytically, what bitumen is, not pyrobitumen, it's the stuff that you wind up being able to dissolve out of kerogen.
Now, pyrobitumen you can't dissolve.
Now, pyrobitumen's a whole nother thing. That's the actual residue of the high temperature oils. But your point that you had a professor who wound up killing a guy, that's too bad, because the oil business didn't have the thermodynamics right, is 100%. That's a really, really important observation, because you've got to go from a high energy source to low energy, and you lose energy on the way. And then when you do that, you don't have to find the goddamn energy. And that's the problem with the oil business. And they find their energy by this stupid model called burial metamorphism, in a basin. They want to pile up shit so they can find the energy to cook the damn kerogen into the oil window. Yeah. But it's coming the other way. And we've been seeing it in our Herkimers forever.
Yeah.
Herkimers were screaming that at us.
Yeah.
You show that to these dead dinosaur guys, they're just dead in the water.
We made a whole webinar series on that, but let's talk about with the last.
Back to this guy. We only got for 2 more minutes.
Right, and I'm gonna kind of wrap this up with what I think would be really most beneficial for our following and for the people that listen to the MagmaChem Research Institute stuff. These webinars,
well,
this
he's
content.
already said a lot of interesting things on the medical side of this.
This is going to be amazing.
I can add some stuff, though, with respect to where the Tucson Gem and Mineral Society fits into the Rock Courier story. But,
cool. No, we definitely have to follow up on more with this story. But what is it about Stan? What do you think, or how do you feel, this is kind of a testimonial, about MagmaChem and the science?
Well, when I first met Stan, I respected him because of how serious and methodical he was about his study of these rare species. Other people just wanted to have one of each, and they didn't really study it very seriously.
That's kind of what Rock
Stan was
that.
extremely meticulous in collecting information, verifying the background of a specimen to make sure that it really was what it said on the label. He was relentless to the point of driving the dealers to exasperation in his relentless hunt for more information on each specimen.
That's what Tony Nekisher accused. He used the word relentless.
Yes. But, you have to have a lot of respect for a guy like that. He takes it seriously. He wants all his information to be verified. He's not willing to just accept what other people say on their say-so.
Then I recorded in my catalog.
Right. I've seen that. Have you seen the catalog? Over 19,000.
You've seen bits and pieces
pieces of it, yes.
Truly, truly remarkable.
He's in there. He's in the collecting notes section.
And of course, Stan got me interested in hydrocarbons, solid hydrocarbons in rocks, because it was not something I had ever paid attention to before. So this was like opened a new window for me. And I started hunting for quartz crystals that had carbon inside of them. And
oh, yeah. He brought me that one time that you got from Fonda in New York.
Yes, yes.
That was a killer.
The one with the diamondoids in it.
Yeah, it literally had every fucking diamondoid in it. Wow. When we did the chromatography on it.
Wow.
10 diamondoids. Really clean spectra.
Yeah.
Wow. But as Alfredo and I commonly rag on the IMA because they won't accept chromatographic evidence for a mineral compound. It was so obvious in it.
That's a whole nother topic that we could spend a whole day on. But the International Mineralogical Association, we call the IMA, is the international body that decides whether a new mineral someone claims to have discovered is really a mineral or not. Is it really a mineral?
What is a mineral?
Well, that's a whole day of discussion right there.
Can I get a one-liner from you, a two-liner from you? And Stan, don't interrupt, because I know you have a depth on here.
A naturally occurring chemical, let me put it different. A naturally occurring substance with a defined chemical composition and crystal structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little broader than that.
Yeah.
As long as it has a homogeneous chemical composition, I'm good, because I don't mind amorphous stuff.
No, I don't mind amorphous stuff either. Actually, the IMA doesn't either. But the vast majority of substances that professional mineralogists study are crystallized.
Structural Nazis.
Stan and I both have an interest in non-crystallized minerals. And a lot of mineralogists are prejudiced against non-crystallized minerals.
Crystallized minerals, I'm not following.
A solid substance that doesn't have a crystal structure. It's amorphous.
Like you can't X-ray it.
Yeah, so when you X-ray it, you get nothing. You get no atomic. Well, like bitumen, for example. Bitumen is solid, but it doesn't have a crystal structure. The atoms in it are just arranged at random. It doesn't build crystals like quartz.
HC and O. It's just a bunch of HC and O, right?
Yeah, but what's interesting about it is you throw it through chromatography, you get all kinds of good repeatable patterns.
When you start burning this thing off.
Yeah, I mean, it's
well, there can be short range order. I mean, that can exist even in water molecules.
Well, the other thing about most of those hydrocarbons, though, is that they don't have a C-axis. That's the big problem. So they have an X and a Y, and so you can see that with the chromatography, but you can't see it with an XRD machine.
Wow!
It doesn't have that third dimension.
The other problem with them from a mineralogist point of view is they don't really have a defined chemical composition, because you would find mixtures of many different hydrocarbon compounds mixed together. They'll hardly ever occur in nature. You may know some exceptions that I'm not aware of, but they will hardly ever occur in nature as a pure compound. You're not going to find
gravitide, hydrolite, natural cornanine.
Well, those are crystallized.
Yeah.
But I mean, the amorphous ones are rarely pure compounds. They're usually mixed, like asphalt or something.
Yeah, some combination.
And so a mineralogist said that's not a real mineral because it doesn't have a defined chemical composition.
Can't trap it, can't cage it. Can't cage it. Wow, man, it's so fascinating to me.
It's a compound, but it has different compounds in it.
The primary tool of most professional mineralogists is their X-ray diffraction machine.
Wow.
That is their major tool. And so if something is amorphous and they can't study it by X-ray diffraction, they're prejudiced against studying it, and they prefer to think of it as a non-mineral because we can't get any information out of it.
Marcus Aurelieri is the biggest snob on that front.
Yep.
Wow. Gosh. Okay, so your interaction with Stan was obviously relentless. He's a scientist. He's really wanting to get down to the gnat's ass of what's going on here in mineralogy.
That was in the details.
Devil's in the details. How does your relationship, how has it gone since 2011 with Stan as far as your development philosophically as a mineralogist? How much has he helped you become a better geologist, mineralogist?
Well, I've learned a lot of things from him, especially about hydrocarbons and amorphous minerals that I didn't know before. I now pay attention to those things, which I didn't used to.
Right.
And I'm run around the world looking for new sources of them, which Stan is always anxious to acquire.
That's right. There's a pecuniary interest in the whole thing.
Plus, he has a wonderful lizard. I really love the lizard. Have you ever shown the lizard? If not, you should. Has the lizard ever been on this camera?
Yes. Yeah. Just recently.
Yeah. Okay.
Look at the you see the tablecloth there with holes in it? That was him climbing. He sat on that rock for about an hour.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stan was giving a presentation to the Geological Society of Nevada, and Draco is in the room.
The lizard is my muse.
It's my muse, too.
Are you into lizards, snakes? No?
Nope. Only Stan's. I don't have any of my own.
Very good.
But
Well,
his
I can't
Japanese
keep animals.
girlfriends loved him.
Yeah. I can't keep any pets myself because I travel too much.
yeah, that makes sense.
You're away from home more than half of the time. It doesn't make sense to try to keep any pets.
Wow.
It
But
would be
you like
unfair to the
animals.
pet too.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit about Mindat? Just to end it, we'd like to make a plug for people to really understand that incredibly valuable source that they have at their fingertips, and they just know about it. How did it begin? And just tell us a little bit about that.
Mindat was started slightly over 20 years ago
Wow.
by a programmer, a computer programmer, a very experienced computer programmer who did forensic work for the EU and various high-tech things like that, which I don't understand, completely over my head. Don't ask me any questions about them. But he was a professional computer programmer who was also a dedicated amateur mineral collector. And he started Mindat as a database for his own personal use, basically to catalog his collection. And when people suggested to him, look, this is great, why don't you put it online so everybody can use it? He did that a little bit over 20 years ago, 21 years ago. And that's how Mindat was born, where he put his database online for every other mineral collector to use. And it very quickly grew into the world's largest online source of mineral information.
Wow.
So there is no other comparable source in the world for information on mineral localities, where you can get different kinds of rare minerals, photographs of the minerals. So if you have a specimen, you compare yours with what everybody else has. There's well over 1 million mineral specimen photographs on the database now.
It's 2 million.
Geological maps, hundreds of thousands of mineral localities around the world. Just recently, they've started a database of research papers on minerals. There are more than 1 million of those online now that you can get access to.
Really?
By locate, it's all
Well, did you get all the
geospatially
rough stuff?
referenced.
Yes.
They get the rough line?
Everywhere,
Digital
from
library?
absolutely everywhere, even in Japanese and Austria and you name it, all the mineralogical publications from that country either are already or soon will be accessible on Mindat.
So we talked about how the whole world, mineralogy and the business of it, you said there's a lot of white space. Is that a place where we can go and get a visual of really what you're saying? Does Mindat have kind of captured what the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show is, in a sense of a kind of a digital?
That's only one vector.
Yeah.
Well, we depend on
Contributions.
contributions from amateurs. A few hundred contributors volunteer their time to upload the data onto Mindat. Now, Jolion has programs that will scrape data from government websites, for example, and geological maps, and have, vast amounts of data automatically uploaded onto Mindat. But information about rare mineral species from different and what localities they come from, and the photographs of the localities and photographs of the mineral specimens, these are mostly uploaded by volunteer amateur mineral collectors. Wow. And some professional mineralogists who will remain nameless because their bosses probably shouldn't know how many hours every day of their professional time they are spending uploading stuff onto Mindat. I won't name any names.
Don't even mention it.
But there are museum curators and mineralogy professors who spend vast amounts of time helping us upload data onto Mindat.
Wow.
But it's mainly a volunteer effort by hundreds of people. I was one of the 20 years ago when Jolion Ralph first started it. He asked for volunteers to help him, and I was in the first group of 6 people who said, yes, I'll help. I was living in Bolivia at the time, so semi-retired, lots of time on my hand. I started uploading information about Bolivian mines and minerals, and then I branched out to the Japanese mines and minerals. Went to live in Japan for a while and got interested in Japanese mines and mineralogy.
Wow.
And so we have different specialists for different countries. And there are countries for which we have no volunteers because nobody knows anything about them and nobody has any minerals from there. We would love to have a volunteer from Ecuador upload information on specimens there. There isn't anybody. That's why I talked before about the white spots on the map.
Right.
There's lots of white spots. Anybody who thinks this planet is completely explored already is dreaming. I mean, in some ways, we know the surface of the moon with more accuracy than we know the surface of the Earth.
Or Mars, for that matter.
Yeah. One of the projects, like I told you, my intention in Bolivia was to retire, and people kept dragging me out of retirement to get involved in one project or another. One of the projects I was involved in for 1 year was funded by the U.S. Embassy in Bolivia, actually by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. And you wonder, what the hell does that have to do with minerals? But basically, there is a part of Bolivia in the jungle where coca leaves are grown. And the DEA was working in Bolivia for many years trying to help the Bolivian police suppress the production of cocaine in Bolivia. And of course, the poor farmers who are growing cocaine, they get paid well for that, and they don't know any other way to make a living.
Right.
And so various stupid projects were suggested for them, like growing pineapples instead of coca. And after the US government provided funds for planting pineapples in the jungle to those people who volunteered to rip their coca bushes out. And when the pineapples, well, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but when the pineapples finally grew, which took 2 years, the poor Indian farmers out in the jungle loaded up a truck of pineapples, brought them to the U.S. Embassy and said, here we are, we've got them now. The U.S. Embassy, well, we don't want them. We don't want them in the U.S. either. We get pineapples from Hawaii. The Hawaiians will get mad if we bring Bolivian pineapples to the U.S. So they basically ended up dumping them because there was way more pineapples than what the Bolivian market could absorb. And so the next year they ripped out all the pineapples and planted coca leaves again. So
I believe it 1,000%.
I tell you, I mean, this is off topic, but the billions of dollars spent on drug suppression every year by the U.S. is the world's biggest waste of taxpayer money out. It violates basic laws of economics. You cannot win the war on drugs. It is an unwinnable war that we have thrown billions of dollars at every year, and we are no closer to success now than we were 30 years ago when it started. It's a total waste. But no politician has the balls to stand up and say, let's stop the war on drugs because it's unwinnable. treat drug addiction like a medical problem, not a criminal problem.
Wow.
It's unwinnable. And yet nobody has the balls to stand up and say, let's stop, because if any politician said, let's stop the war on drugs, that would be a death sentence for them.
Yeah. Wow.
So we continue wasting this money. And I was involved in that for 1 year as a mineralogist, because the US Embassy had the idea of supporting alternative work projects for the people who lived in the jungle planting coca. We know they're not going to stop planting coca unless they have another source of income. Right. So let's create a national park and train some of these coca farmers to be guides for tourists in the national park, because the place where they grow the coca leaves is a super beautiful area. It's virgin jungle. You know, they keep these guys as their coca plantations are destroyed, they just retreat deeper and deeper into the jungle to plant new coca plantations. And some of these jungle areas where they are currently growing coca, they have never been penetrated by human beings before. They're like virgin jungle before the coca growers arrive.
Oh my God.
They have animals. They have hundreds of new species of orchids that no one has ever seen before. Okay, let's take a few thousand square miles of this, turn it into a national park, and teach these coca growers to be park guards, park guides, and do, hunt for medicinal plants, or do all kinds of alternative occupations other than planting coca. And so when the national park was established, the US Embassy, or the DEA through the US Embassy, funded a program to study this area which had never been studied before, basically virgin jungle. So I was part of a team of 12 people. There was an anthropologist, a botanist, a zoologist, a hydrologist.
It's like a real-life superhero team.
Is this where you got the Danberites?
Yes, exactly. The Danberites were from this area, which was proposed to become a national park, and later did become a national park.
But then once it becomes a national park, you can't mine Danberite anymore.
Gosh, dang it.
They're not supposed to be planting coca either, but they still are.
Right.
But, yes, the DEA funded this project to study this virgin jungle area, and I was the guy who joined the team as the mineral guy. My job was hopefully to find out that there were no economically valuable minerals on this land, because the Bolivian government was willing to go along with this park creation idea as long as there were no valuable mineral deposits there.
Wow.
So instead of having an economic geologist tell them this is where the valuable minerals are, they wanted me to do the opposite.
Yeah.
They wanted me to tell them that this is where there aren't going to be any valuable minerals. So yes, we can go ahead and put a national park here.
Wow. Gosh, dang, Alfredo.
So
Petrov.
I got to find minerals in an area that had never been explored before. And I'm sure there were some valleys I set foot in that no human being had ever been in before.
Wow.
It was very exciting. It was great fun.
You realized that at the time when you were walking through there?
Oh, yes, definitely. Sure. Yeah. I knew I was going to be finding minerals that no one had ever seen before.
Wow. You ever stepped in foot on something that no human has? Well, I guess the volcano in Hawaii. I'm sure that nobody's stepped foot there.
But why I mentioned this was going back to the white patch on the map theory, because before we started the study, the whole team got together, and we had a limited budget of only $80,000, which wouldn't do anything in the US, but in Bolivia, that's supposed to fund 12 people for a year of studying something.
Right.
So it's a really low budget study. And we have to decide how many thousands of dollars are we willing to spend out of the budget for satellite images. We contacted NASA to get satellite images. We were charged thousands of dollars for them. We needed, helicopter time and things like that. It all costs a lot of money, and we had a very limited budget. But the problem was NASA came back to us and said, most of the area you're studying is under permanent cloud forest. We do not have any images of it.
Oh my gosh.
That's
wow. Alfredo Petrov, you're completely blown my mind. I hope we can do a lot more shows. I really hope you can stay longer. Anytime you're in town, we got to keep this going. I mean, you're such an incredibly
It's a fountain of information.
a fountain of information. Yes, that's exactly the words I was looking for. A fountain of information. The last thing I would say about MNDAT and why I was so excited to talk about MNDAT is because the Research Institute, we're trying to raise awareness of the MagmaChem science, raise awareness and excitement for the undiscovered, and that there's a model that allows us to be a lot more predictable, a lot more safe with what we're doing with our time and attention. It's not just simply going out there and finding things. We can be very strategic about this, and we can be a lot safer about it. And the MagmaChem Research Institute has a lot to deliver. And so one thing that's developing is a potential major TV company has now found us, and they're interested about doing a story about, I wasn't going to drop any names, but they're interested about producing a story about MagmaChem science and about graphene deposit that has a major influence on alternative energy. I would love to introduce MNDAT to that audience of potentially hundreds of millions of people, and that they have access and maybe have an interview when if this major TV show does happen, we would get MNDAT involved, and it's an amazing source for people to begin this exploration, for us to begin the exploration of our own planet and stop fooling around with everything else out in space. Our fishbowl is plenty exciting, and there's so much more.
Made notion of that.
I would like to look at this also from the exact opposite point of view, and see MagmaChem put some information on MNDAT about graphene and pictures of your graphene deposits. There's nothing on graphene on MNDAT so far. So
First thing.
You're hired.
First thing going on MNDAT right there. There's graphene.
Very good, very good.
Right on.
Okay. If you provide me with the information and the photos, I'll be happy to put it on MNDAT. And
well, I have a huge graphene PowerPoint. I'll send it. I'll give that to you. And then you can bastardize it.
Great. MagmaChem and MNDAT can support each other.
That would be fantastic. That's absolutely the end goal for us. We want to integrate, and we want to provide the people that are really starting to gravitate towards MagmaChem and say, whoa, I can't believe this story. I mean, we talk to them enough, but we're such a small group that it's almost impossible to really catch some good traction, but we finally are. And now if we get to team up with a source like yours, and we say, look, this is Arizona, the maps of Arizona that Stan has about where to find these.
You haven't really looked at that yet, have you? This new mineralogy of Arizona that's about to.
He's got an exploration map of all the 900 plus
that's
minerals known.
Exploration map for mineral collectors right now.
Yeah, in the state of Arizona, and it comes with a lot more than just here's a area where you could potentially find these like highly sought after and exciting gems and minerals, but there's all the geology, there's the dynamic layered earth model that sits behind that polygon too, and there's so much more to that deposit, and us discovering how it became a deposit and what
MagmaChem ultimately does is it links mineralogy to geology, basically.
Yeah,
in an organized way that you saw me being organized on rare minerals. Well, you haven't even begun to see what I do with the geology. You have a kick on it.
It is. It's fascinating.
This guy is meticulous. Those are the adjectives we can stick on stand. Meticulous, relentless,
raw tooth and claw.
Comprehensive.
I plead guilty.
Detailed.
All of you.
Yes. It's truly remarkable. I'm so excited to be here, and let's continue to do this and build our relationships. I'm really, really investing a lot into developing what we're talking about, because I believe the planet is ready to do it. I believe people are ready to do it. I believe there's cities.
He's got, what is it? This Uru fake Uber, right?
Well, it's a mobile car fixing company in town in Tucson. It's very successful. And yeah, they want to do field trips. They want to do MagmaChem guided field trips.
Shit.
Yeah. Tell us about the geology. These big crack that we live on that's connected to Africa. If you really look at it from the moon and the study that he's done with cracks of the world, you're going, whoa, that's an interesting thing to talk about, and the origin of life.
There's been a real, as Monty would put it, nature deficit disorder. There's been so much emphasis on computers and cell phones and all that. I think people are getting tired of that, and I think they want to go back to nature.
Right.
Yeah.
The problem is there's very few people that are organized. Say, all right, you want to do that? Here we go. So we need a team that can take it there.
Right. You have the software. Mindat absolutely is that connection. We have the models. We have the everything to answer those curiosity and the curious questions you have in Outcrop, but we don't have that spatial database that allows you to say, whoa, there's actinolite over here.
Jolien's done that, and then you've got this crazy Spear for Pollock guy. He's kind of in that sort of realm.
We've had large mining companies contact Mindat about helping them custom-made programs to scrape the data.
Wow.
For example, mineral associations.
Wow.
That can be useful to large companies because
Definitely.
when the company geologists, exploration geologists have questions like, if we find this mineral, what other minerals are likely to be associated with it?
That's MagmaChem, baby.
More than that, what
Mindat is
deposit
perfect
model
for
and what
picking out that type of information.
and what intrusive is going to be there.
Yeah.
Right.
What magma chemistry is going. That's when you see our maps.
Right. Right.
You're going to light up.
That's unbelievable.
Jolien's going to love it.
It's truly incredible
We're
to think
just
about.
going to get that
We will.
dyslexic Yahoo to pay attention.
How does Mindat raise money? How does Mindat stay afloat?
Well, until now, it's mostly by voluntary donations.
Wow.
We collect money from mineral collectors mostly, who voluntarily give donations. They figure we use Mindat every day to catalog our collections, so we get to use it free of charge. Mindat doesn't charge them anything, but some people voluntarily contribute. Wow. And it costs quite a, it's surprising how much it costs to run a website like that when you have the hosting costs and you have salaries for programmers and you need a much larger server and hosting service than you do for private website, for my own website, which is nothing.
Right, yeah, blog site.
So it's a lot of money. We need $200,000 a year,
wow.
which is a lot less than what a site like Wikipedia needs, obviously.
Yeah.
We're still very small compared to that, but it's still a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
And Rock Courier, who has been mentioned before in various contexts this evening, he left a considerable amount of money to Mindat in his will since he had no family.
Oh my God.
And so we acquired Rock Courier's some funding from his estate,
wow.
which has been wisely invested and now brings in some money. His idea was to create a longevity fund for Mindat, so we wouldn't spend his money, we would invest it and then live on the proceeds. But the proceeds that it brings in are less than half of the operating expenses. So a few mineral collectors mistakenly now think, oh, we don't have to donate to Mindat anymore because they've got the Rock Courier inheritance and they don't need money anymore. But
that's wrong.
That's wrong. That brings in less than half of our operating expenses. We have had a few contributions from major research projects, like the Rough project here at the University of Arizona. They have made contributions to Mindat because they use our data for their own work.
Wow.
And we've been hoping for contributions from mining companies who have the most money and are the most stingy in distributing it. I can't remember if we've got any contributions from mining companies or not. It's either been very small or nothing, yes.
Oh my gosh, that right there explains and is an interesting dialogue, I guess, between the disconnect of the reality of where we are as human beings. You have a trillion-dollar, multi-trillion-dollar business of searching for mining material, for metals and minerals. That's what they get paid to do. You have a nonprofit that says, here's the worldwide database of us trying to figure out where they all come from and what they're all made out of and controlling it, and they don't fund it. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, Jolion is currently in discussion with a large international mining corporation about building a custom-made which of course Mindat would charge for. I mean, Mindat is a non-profit educational institution.
Yeah, but it's for them.
So the things we can charge money for are limited.
Right.
But if Mindat, for example, if Jolion has to make a custom-made program to help this mining company scrape specifically the data that they are interested in, then of course Mindat will charge the mining corporation for that. And this will be something that helps the mining corporation because they'll get the data in a format which is most useful to them, and it will also help Mindat raise the funds that they need for operating.
The mining company will get exclusivity on that too.
Exactly. It won't help the general public. Well, the general public has access to Mindat free of charge.
Right.
You can look up any data you like free of charge.
It's incredible. I mean, he uses it every day. Every day. The world's expert of cataloging minerals is using Mindat.
What we highly recommend, and not everybody knows, is that every user of Mindat should register. It's free of charge, get a password, and be a registered user of Mindat and log in every time you use with your password. I don't know if you do that, Stan.
No.
You gave me one, but I haven't used it.
Well, because the problem is that in order to reduce the load on the server, because we don't have enough money to have a giant servers like Facebook or Wikipedia have. So in order to reduce the load on our server, anybody who doesn't log in has access to limited amounts of data. If you're a registered user and you log in, you have access to certain things that the general public doesn't see. So we recommend all of you out there who like to use Mindat's information, become a registered user. It's free of charge.
It really helps.
And then log in when you use Mindat.
So what do you get that the general public doesn't get?
Well, you can get, for example, changes logs. You can find out who added a specific part of information, and that might be useful to you sometimes. Right?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Really cool.
You can add more information yourself and upload your photographs, which you can't do if you're not logged in. If you're not logged in, you can see other people's photos, but you can't add
Well, I
any
mean,
new
what's
photos.
out there in the public domain on this site has kept me busy. I haven't felt any real reason to dig into.
Besides, you're helping them out. You need to register. You need to log in every time you use it. It helps the internet. It helps it be more efficient.
And then we encourage, if anybody feels like donating a small amount of money to Mindat to help it, we recommend sponsoring pages. You can sponsor species pages or locality pages for $50 a year, or maybe it's gone up to $100 a year, $100 a year.
That's
maybe
nothing.
now, I'm not sure. It recently went up, inflation.
Wow.
But for $100 a year, you can sponsor your favorite locality, or you can sponsor your favorite mineral.
Wow.
And in the top right-hand corner of the page, it will say sponsored by Dr. Stanley Keith or Dr. Troy Tittlemeyer.
No,
or
MagmaChem. MagmaChem, yes.
MagmaChem Research Institute has
All right,
sponsored
last
this
question.
page.
Last question, we'll go to dinner. Does anybody know how Rock Carrier got his name? What's the story on that?
It's his honest to good name. His father was a famous surgeon, and his name was Currier. That was his surname. And his mother named him Rock because his mother was a fan of the actor Rock Hudson, I think. I think that was how he got his name.
Wow.
So it's a perfect name for an international mineral dealer to be a Rock Courier, but that is his name on his birth certificate.
What an unbelievable
People
story.
think he made it up for his business, but he didn't.
That's an unbelievable story. Alfredo Petrov, thank you so much for sharing this time.
You're most welcome.
I
Glad to be
enjoyed it.
here.
Enjoyed it so much.